Hello there, you're just in time for Sidebar. My name is Trevor. We're just sitting in for Larry Mado. The gentlemen are late, only the ladies are here. I want to thank you for making time. Honorable Martha Wangari, nominated senator, and also the Jubilee Gilgil Member of Parliament candidate. Yes, you wanted me to say that exactly like that. All right. And Honorable Gladys Unga, Homa Bay Women Representative, is here. We're still waiting for Johnson Sakaja, nominated MP and Nairobi Senate candidate as well, and Mutula Kilonzo Jr., who's a Makueni senator. There's a lot to talk about, but first, here's the Weekend 60 Seconds.
Sisi tumesema tukishika namna hii kuanzia Septemba watoto watasoma bure katika shule zote za sekondari.
Kutoka mwaka ujao watoto wetu wa upili wasome kutoka form 1 mpaka form 4.
Na nataka kuhakikishia machiefs wote, Raila hatafuta kazi chief yoyote. Tuta-reform you, we shall repackage you, we shall make you look good.
Maziwa ya mkulima inalipwa shilingi 43 kwa kilo moja, bei ambayo haijawahi kupatikana tangu Kenya ipate uhuru.
Mimi tuliwachana na yeye wakati aliua the sugar industry, akaruhusu Uganda ambayo haina sukari ati ilete sukari. Miasi yetu imekufa. Wakenya walikuwa wanafikiri ni shida yetu.
All right then, the hashtag is Sidebar. Keep your opinion coming. Let's start with one of the most pressing issues, ladies, and the nurses' strike. Who is to blame here? Let's start with you, man.
I think, Trevor, it's not about who is to blame, because you cannot peg the lives of the 6 patients who lost their lives in Mombasa or elsewhere in this country.
But someone should take responsibility.
Yeah, but we cannot call it, we cannot just say who is to blame. I think we agree that it is a crisis because you cannot have nurses out of work. And I can tell you, you know, health is one of the devolved function that has caused a lot of discussion around the country. It's not the first time we've had doctors and we resolved it. We've had other strikes, but most importantly, I think the Council of Governors. I was with Governor Nanok today in the Public Accounts Committee of the Senate, and they had a crisis meeting, including discussions even with the unions, discussions with the ministries, so that they can see how they can collaborate. But I think the COG must take a lead role, as usual, because it's their responsibility squarely on their docket. And I think they're already talking so that we can resolve it as soon as possible. It's in our interest that the services come back as soon as possible, because we cannot afford to lose lives.
So do you reckon the governors have failed then?
It's not about failing. I think we have had this discussion of CBA, of former agreements, of you know, raises, of payments, of salaries and promotions. I think these issues have already been raised. The nurses have been patient a bit. I would say that the COG must really look at how they honor the CBAs as agreed.
Doesn't that then also mean that the senators who are supposed to be practicing oversight have also let down the nurses, so to speak?
I don't want to say let down, but I think it's a collaboration of every person to play their part. Because the Senate much they can do is oversight, and I think even during the doctor strike, you saw the Health Committee of the Senate actually took a lead role, led by Senator Mashage, to actually make sure they broker the deal between the nurses and the Council of Governors. And I think since this has not failed, today they were having a meeting today, just today, so I would think that unless we have had collapsed talks, then we can now say we need to intervene or to oversight. But I think the COG is on it, and it have been on the, you know, on the lead and on the front to find a solution.
Honorable Unga, what do you make of this situation?
I think we're dealing with a very dishonest government here. And I think the worst government at dealing with labor relations in the history of this country. Because we saw doctors on strike for 100 days. We've never really seen that before. We saw teachers on strike for almost 3 months, and then they were arm-twisted back to work. They were not even, they didn't even broker a deal and go back to work happy. They were literally arm-twisted back into classrooms. And what nurses are saying is why are you calling us for talks? We have already negotiated. We have a CBA. All we want is for us to sign this CBA. And you know who's refusing? It's the SRC, who a lot of times is used by government when they don't want to meet their part of the deal. And nurses are saying, okay, what are we negotiating? We have already completed negotiations. We just want our CBA to be signed so that we are guaranteed of the agreements that we had. And really, I think while the COG might have been involved with the doctors' strike, I think on this one, they are clean because the deal was negotiated, it was brokered, it was done. Now signing of the CBA is all that is left. And SRC is pulling their leg and the national government is dragging their feet on this one. So, and especially looking at a government that has had the worst history in dealing with labor relations, I think the government really just needs to be honest. What you can do, you can do. What you can't do, you can't do. And from the word go, just be forthright, be honest, and make sure that critical services such as nurses, doctors, and so on, do not have to go on strike repeatedly for their demands to be met.
All right, Jackson, bring up my screen here. Riziki says counties have mishandled the health sector. It's really bad. People are just dying like flies. And Eric Onchonga says, why is this regime experiencing so many strikes like this? It raises eyebrows a lot. Do you agree, first, that it's one of the worst, it has the worst relationship in industrial labor?
I think the one thing I agree with Honorable Unga, and we agree, because when a woman loses their life or loses their child, that one we're in agreement that it does not happen to a CORD person or a Jubilee person. That when that problem is there, there is an issue. But I would want to say, I don't think it's really fair. And being a campaigner, I know it has also been there has been use of even the trade unions to actually push and cause instability, so that instability in government, so that you can portray the government to be bad in dealing with these issues. But more importantly, if you say SRC is being used, I think it's quite not honest, because one of the most independent commissions, and I think we've had, she's a commissioner in Parliamentary Service Commission, if we've had a problem with one commission, even ourselves as parliamentarians, in terms of being squeezed and being pushed, is SRC, because they have always stood their ground, and even if you try to push them, they won't budge. And I think you cannot say that people use SRC, the government uses SRC to actually deny workers their dues or their demands. I don't think that is right.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing if they cannot be pushed regardless of what's happening? Because this is a situation where people are now losing lives.
I think it works either way, because I remember in Parliament when we got in, we had a big problem with SRC in terms of putting our salaries, especially for the senators. We had issues with the salaries as had been set by the SRC, but they stood firm. And I think that worked for the country, worked for the wage bill, and that is a good thing. But right now, I think the most important is to get the people who are involved on the table, because the biggest problem we have as a country is bringing politics to everything, even when there is a serious crisis that we want to talk at each other. We don't want to talk with each other. Everyone to play their role, including the COG, including the nurses and the trade unions that they are pushing for their demands, including SRC, so that everyone does their work to resolve. But I don't think it is fair to say that these strikes have been there even when there was Nusumkate government, even before. So I don't think it's fair to say that you can use Jubilee as just the yardstick for dealing with labor issues as the worst. Yeah. I don't think that is.
I think we've had strikes before, but they've not been as long, because there's always been goodwill on both parts to resolve them. But you realize that even teachers went on strike for a very long time, Trevor. This is the point that I'm making. It cannot be that it is one government that has the longest strikes, whether it is teachers, whether it is doctors, whether, very, very essential services. And you remember, even when the teachers were on strike, the president came out and said, can't pay, won't pay. And that is the arrogance, I think, that makes professionals, because these are professionals in their own right. Yeah. And then the other day he came out and said doctors, are malicious, they don't even they work for 2 hours. And that was very, very discouraging for a head of state. And I think it is this deep-seated arrogance right at the center of the Jubilee government that makes it impossible to negotiate. Because in labor relations, and I sit in the Labor and Social Welfare Committee of Parliament, when people have to be willing to meet somewhere, because professionals don't just wake up and go on strike. There must be issues, and people must be willing to meet somewhere. But we have seen a deep-seated arrogance that says, you go back to work, let's talk from there. As if to, in fact, take away people's rights to even go on strike. It's like to be told you're being punished for being on strike in the first place. Yes, it is your constitutional right to actually go on strike if there is need to. And we're not talking about, I'm not encouraging and saying everybody should just wake up and go on strike and hope that, but you have seen that there are real issues. Even when the doctors went on strike, there were real issues, even beyond their pay. The CBA that they were asking to be signed was raising very serious issues about the environments in which they work. Whether they have facilities to perform their duties, and to attend to patients. And when these are dismissed, this is what brings the conceit on the part of the people who are on strike and the part of government as well. So what we are saying is we need to see some leadership, some willingness, less arrogance in how industrial action is going. And I agree with my sister Martha that this is not the first time that these things are happening. But we see a difference in how they are handled within this regime that we have currently.
Okay. And Martha, I'll let you respond to that before we take a short break, because also Patrick on Twitter says, why does the government wait only to deal with the crisis when in reality efforts could have been made earlier in time?
I tend to think, I don't really want to talk for the people who do the negotiations, but I tend to think that even before, because there has to be a notice for a strike, so there is already something going on. Maybe it's not resolved in time for the strike to happen. But I think in terms of honesty, I would say that we also need not be hypocritical, that we want a government that is open, that is straightforward. But when a government says we cannot sustain this, and if you sign this, it won't work, then you're told it's arrogant. I think we need to be very fair that we say this government or whatever government must be able, or whatever employer must be able to say, you know what, you have 300% demand, I cannot handle 300%, can we negotiate to some level? And that negotiation must come from both sides, because even the unions must be able to negotiate for the greater good. That is one, and we have seen that even from the judiciary, that they look at the bigger picture in terms of resolving these labor-related matters.
But for the nurses, it's not even about negotiations anymore. It's just about signing the CBA, which had already been negotiated.
That is the thing, because the implementation, it's not just negotiation. Even the implementation, I think with the doctor, that's also what happened, that the government said, we are not able to for this one. And that, for me, is the honesty we are looking for,
Trevor,
not the arrogance.
But Trevor, you see, we're talking, the reason I bring in the aspect of dishonesty is there's a lot of political expediency. You realize that even the doctors were not, you remember, their tagline was CBA, which was, there was already a negotiated and signed CBA within the life,
which was challenged,
within the life of this government,
which was challenged.
Okay. So you sign a CBA, then you go ahead and challenge it using SRC.
You cannot say you use SRC. Because
using SRC, when I say using SRC is you bring SRC to say, oh, did we really give our input in this CBA? So what I'm saying is the doctors were on strike because they wanted a CBA that this very government signed, implemented. The nurses also a CBA that they have negotiated with this government signed. So we are not talking about negotiating. And when you're on the negotiating table, you're allowed to say, that one I can't do, that one I can't do,
and that
one I can do. But once you have negotiated, don't start moving backwards on agreements. This is the dishonesty that I'm talking about as far as the Jubilee administration is concerned. And the reason why people are not finding it easy to settle and go back to work, because they don't know what they will, what to believe and what not to believe.
I think, Trevor, we also must be honest, because if you say this government, you can't pile everything to this government. Out of 47 governors, 24 are from CORD. In fact, the leadership right now is a CORD governor in terms of dealing with the issues of health. So I think we need to be a bit honest. And the issue of using SRC, you cannot use an institution that is given autonomy in the constitution, that is given independence in the constitution. I think it would be misleading the country to say that I'm using SRC to push something. I think that is hearsay, and I think that is rumors.
All right.
By all
let's take a short break here on Sidebar. Remember, the hashtag is Sidebar. I see a lot of your response here. We're still waiting for the gentlemen. Hopefully they'll be here on the other side of the break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with Sidebar. We have a lot to talk about, but Super Senator, he likes to call himself that, Johnson Sakaja, nominated Member of Parliament and Nairobi Senate candidate, is joining us. Thanks for making time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before you came in, we were talking about the nurses' strike, and you heard part of what Honorable Unga was saying.
Yes.
What's your response to that?
First of all, allow me to apologize to the viewers. You know, when you put out the poster,
Yeah.
Nairobi residents knew I'm here, so I had to address supporters downstairs. It took a bit long, but I'm here.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I must agree with my colleagues. It's an unfortunate situation. I think you need to be more worried when nurses are striking than even when doctors are striking. In most hospitals, the person who you will see and will treat you and finish the issue is really the nurse. However, I think there's need for some perspective to be put in there. I've had a lot of blame being thrown to the Jubilee government. These nurses are employed by county governments. And in this constitutional dispensation, because I've had a reference to, you know, within the last 4 years and before that, we didn't have several other institutions like the governors, the Council of Governors, the SRC and such like, which also play a part. I think labor relations do need to be improved. I've heard that the strike started in the midst of negotiations. I think the nurses should have given space for negotiations, but it is 47 governors. You know, if we say the Jubilee government, then we'd only be talking about the nurses employed by the national government. CBAs are signed between an employer and the employee. The employee is the nurses. The employer is a respective county government. And that's a discussion, and if I had Nanok right, that has been going on collectively within the entire council. So it is not just nurses who are at Kenyatta Hospital and the international referral hospitals, but it's a lot of those in the counties. And I would really like to urge both the governors and the nurses, you know, really to, you know, to close ranks, you know, as soon as possible, because nurses not being there is what bites at, you know, the health of this country. Nanok is not Jubilee, and it doesn't matter, you know, which party he's from, because of a crisis staring at us. But this needs to be sorted out. And I think moving forward, we need some level of, and I'm glad Senator Wangari said it, some level of honesty between all players, you know. You can't have a CBA and after that, you know, there's a disagreement from one side or the other side. Or people bringing strikes just when you get to election year, as has been the case in this country over the past few election cycles. We need to think of the Kenyans first.
All right.
Yeah.
You want to respond to that before?
Yeah, I
we go
think
to the next story?
what Sakaja is not saying is that the National Union of Nurses,
Yes.
and the CBA we are talking about here is not between the Council of Governors and the nurses. It's between, it engages the national government as well. And that is why I made reference to the national government. This is the first term of devolution. There has been devolution of functions, there has been devolution of resources, but it has moved slowly. The CBA that we're talking about was negotiated with engagement of the Council of Governors, but also with involvement of the national government. So we cannot remove blame from the national government. And the reason I was bringing in the national government is because the nurses' strike is not in isolation. I was bringing in the national government and the Jubilee government specifically because of the handling of a series of other labor relations. And this is the context within which I was engaging at that level. And I think that has to be very clear, because I made reference to, of course, several, you remember the doctors' strike. Of course, health is devolved, but you remember the tussle that was between the CS and the PS in the negotiations. So it cannot be said that the national government is not involved with these things. Probably as we move into the future, it will be a case of Council of Governors versus union officials. But as it is now, the national government is a core part. And in fact, the place where there is a stalemate is not even within the Council of Governors. It's with other players, national government and SRC.
Actually, in this
CBA.
specific scenario, the nurses had struck before. Remember, just before the doctors. The national government had helped arbitrate and the issue was sorted out. Now, all these nurses were supposed to go and domesticate those agreements within their counties and within their respective employers. That's the problem today. In fact, Nanok is pleading and saying that now he is asking the Minister for Labor to come and arbitrate, not to give the solution, but to arbitrate between both parties.
All right.
And I think that has to be very clear, even in terms of the collaboration between the two levels of government. It does not mean because just the health is a devolved function, the national government cannot be involved. It can, but under Article 189 of cooperation between the two levels. But it can't not be the primary respondent in this case. It cannot, because the employer is the CUG.
Okay, let's move on from this particular topic and bring in a different one that involves the government directly. A National Super Alliance presidential candidate Raila Odinga is blaming President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Jubilee administration for the prevailing hunger in the country. Listen to what he said earlier on.
People tend to ignore science and then they make it a crisis at the last minute. And this becomes an avenue for corrupt practices of single sourcing maize at exorbitant prices instead of tendering. This is the situation we do not want to find ourselves in next year." Unquote. The response of the Jubilee government was to deny and demonize. It was not until mid-April that duty was lifted from maize coming to Kenya. This appears to have been a deliberate move to profit some people.
Sakaja, what do you make of that?
Well,
get your reactions to what Raila Odinga just said.
Well, I think it's politics. That is purely politics, you know, completely.
Does he have a point, though? Why not import the maize from Ethiopia, who is a neighbor, instead to get it from Mexico, which is 40 days away on sea, and Ethiopia is just a day on land?
I think you should be aware, because a statement was sent by the Minister of Agriculture, that part of the maize we have is from Ethiopia. And that was sent out to newsrooms. But that's not the question, saying that you're blaming Jubilee for the hunger and famine, as if Jubilee could affect the weather. You know?
His argument is that they were warned early, but they didn't respond.
Yes, and there has been response all the way from August 2016. You know, from August 2016, and if I can take you through some of the steps, you know, there were already interventions that were going on by government. Those between August and November, there was a 4-point drought mitigation strategy that included water tracking. More than 3 million Kenyans were receiving relief food. Of course, there was a livestock offtake that was going on at that point. There was upscale cash transfers, which is actually now the preferred model. You know, if you ask even the Senate committees, when they were interacting with the Red Cross and also the National Assembly, that is the preferred model that is being used today. And beyond that, you know, after further review in February 2017, of course, the president then declared it a national disaster. April 2017 is when the tax, of course, on that was reduced. And as we speak now, the prices of maize have been subsidized. You know, initially, of course, the strategy had been to subsidize from the point of production. You know, that means, you know, the input subsidy program, meaning that you subsidize the farmer fertilizer and all his inputs. Now we have to subsidize as well at the point of consumption. Okay. Beyond that, price of maize is retailing at 90 shillings now. Of course, we want to make sure that it gets to everyone, because some people have been trying to hoard it, but it's retailing at 90 shillings. From last week, milk is 50 shillings per liter, you know, and that is, of course, you know, you need to translate that completely across the country, but that is the price that it's retailing at. And sugar prices from next week should be at 120.
One guy here is laughing.
I have to laugh because Sakaja probably just finds ugali on the table and he doesn't know how that has come. Let me first say, let me first say that there's no Unga. And I know Kenyans watching out there know that there is no Unga. I don't have the privilege of finding ugali on the table. I have to go to the. I have to go. No, hang on. Hang on. I have to go to the supermarket to get maize flour. The day before yesterday, I was at Tuskys T-Mall. There was absolutely no Unga. Not even the 90 bob one, but none really at all. And now, Sakaja says that Unga is 90 shillings. We've been going across the country. We have asked them if they have seen this 90 shilling Unga that is being talked about. And I think the next question we must be asking is, where is our 6 billion that we were told was going to be used to subsidize maize so that we have unga on our tables? Right now, the 90 bob one is not there, but even if you wanted to buy the one for 180 shillings, you can't find it. But let me come back to the issue that let me come back. No. Let me come back to the real point. Yeah, the real point here is what our presidential candidate, the NASA presidential candidate, was raising today. And what he was raising is this. And of course, Sakaja is simplifying it to say that you cannot prevent famine. But of course, if you have prediction, like was given by the Tegemeo Institute late last year, and you have interventions such as the East African Grain Council bringing together Kenyan traders and Ethiopian traders so that we could have maize from the nearby Ethiopia, which would get here in a day or two, and all that the Ethiopians asked, because Ethiopia had a bumper harvest, they had 4 million metric tons, they had 1 million extra metric tons to export, and even when Kenyans went there, they got a deal of 300,000 metric tons to come in. And they said, can we lower the tariffs so that we can bring in the maize, because they are not a part of the East African community? And Trevor, the government began to dilly-dally, as if to say they did not need the Ethiopian maize. And even currently, as we speak, only 50,000 metric tons of maize have been imported from Ethiopia, while as soon as the tariffs were removed, we had maize here from Mexico. So what we are saying, and this is not politics, this is reality. What we are saying is the government needs to explain why we could not import maize from Ethiopia and instead had to wait when Kenyans were now going completely hungry to create a crisis and import tax-free maize from Mexico. And this is the politics, and it is very serious.
Well, let me bring in Madam on this.
That's completely
and
false.
also on, I will let you respond in a bit. And on Twitter, Danny Nyabaga says the food crisis is a failure due to poor planning by government. The much-touted Unga is nowhere to be found.
Exactly.
I don't want to, I don't think there is any government, Trevor, that has been as responsive as the Jubilee government. Because the role of a government is to, there's a problem, what have I done about it? And I think to a hungry person, let us even imagine, to a hungry person, the issue of is it yellow maize or is it red maize, is it from Ethiopia? Are you, unless you're campaigning for some people you want to import from Ethiopia and you have a business deal, I don't see any business that you have to do with it. And I want to say, economic sabotage is very interesting. It starts like this. And I'll tell you, there is a time during the Nusumkate government, if you remember, that Raila went to Isli. And he could not address a crowd because there were chants of Unga, if you remember. I don't know whether you remember. Because it's not an, and let me tell you, the issue of climatic changes, it's not an issue of Kenya. It does not just affect, it affects the region.
However,
and have we had a problem? Yes, we have had a problem. But have we responded? Yes, we have responded. Because our response,
the plans
our
are
response,
told from August.
Our response is to make availability and affordability. And I think what Raila is doing and his team is to actually cause panic, first of all. Because if you have abnormal buying patterns, what do you expect? Because you will find there's a scramble because there's a problem. People now know we are going to get hungry next week. So the buying patterns affect the market. And for me, that is how I look at it. That
there's been hoarding and overbuying.
You do hoarding and you overprice. And I think the issue of hoarding is another one because it is not an issue of COD or Jubilee. And I think that one, we're in agreement that as a country, we also must deal with the problem of middlemen in terms of dealing with hoarding and
I really
overpricing.
have to take a break.
But in terms of intervention, in terms I've not finished.
Yes.
In terms of interventions, I think the government has done so much to even look into the future to avoid such crises. But I think this panic and sending panic messages to be able to see a government and the people you want to vote for you fall, and it's not right.
But I think it's a case of creating a problem and then coming to pretend to resolve it. And my friend Senator Martha should have had herself saying, you shouldn't care whether it's red maize, yellow maize. How do you get your citizens to a point where they don't even care whether they are eating poisoned maize or they are eating whatever kind of maize?
I did not talk about it. That is not right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I really have to take a break for the news highlights. We'll be back for this. I will let you respond to what you just said.
This breaks are very, but let's finish our point to its conclusion. You must be able to question the kind of agronomics that is existing in coal mines, and saying that in 90 days they will have stabilized food prices, that there will be no longer doubt.
Sakaja, we'll get to the whole issue of politics in just a bit.
And subsidize
on the supermarkets.
and avail it in the supermarket.
You know, in 90 days,
hold on one second. I really have to take a short break from the news highlights. Sidebar
Maize
still
grows in
here.
90
Keep your
days.
comments coming.
It's
This is a
like
heated debate, but Jackson, take it away. All right, thanks for staying with Sidebar. The conversation has still been ongoing, and I see it on Twitter as well. The hashtag is Sidebar. Jeremiah Munguti says, this Unga thing is in itself an economic sabotage. How did we get here in the first place? Bernard Kaibe says, there is no Unga in supermarket shelves. Sakaja should stop lying to Kenyans and ask people on the ground. This government has failed. I mean, now that you've been mentioned directly, I'll let you start by responding.
In the sky, because I'm not on the ground. We're on the ground. In fact, we buy Unga for a lot of people, not just our immediate families. And what's been happening, you know, to be honest, is supermarkets are stocked in a day, it's over. The next day, it takes one or 2, 3 days, you find the stock is there, but there's so much panic buying, you know, so people are being allowed to buy more than they should buy. I know a few supermarkets are now restricting and saying that you can only buy 1 packet. But what's happening is that people are coming with the whole family. So you have 6 people on the line from the same household. And it's because our friends here are causing panic.
Oh my God.
And telling people there'll be no Unga, there's no Unga. So people run to the supermarkets and buy everything. I mean, you cannot ignore government's effort to subsidize millers to reduce it to a 8-year low of 90 shillings. You know, it has not been that low in more than 8 years. And because of that, then there's a lot of overbuying. The Unga comes, it's there in the supermarkets. And I'm sure there are many people who've seen it as well, or who have been able to buy it. Probably even Gladys as well, because she's bought Unga in the last few weeks. You say you buy me, I don't buy.
Unga.
So you've not been having ugali?
I didn't get
in your house.
Unga.
There is. And in fact, someone tweeted that at Tuskys Timor that she's talking about, there's Unga today. Probably tomorrow there won't be. And you see, this is why we need to stop this panic, you know, and make sure that these things are there in enough quantities.
Trevor.
Yes.
You know, I debate with Sakaja many times, but today he is the most unreasonable Sakaja I have seen, because he has to defend a government that has actually failed. He blames NASA and Raila
for the panic,
for the Unga shortage.
No, for the panic.
Why did we get here in the first place? And that's the question we are asking, and that's what we need answers to. Why did we get here in the first place? And this is why we are saying, if the government was warned early, and we now have a report of the Tegemeo Institute that warned the government very early, but they came out and said, you remember the deputy president saying, maize eco, you know, we actually have enough maize. But now if you go to NCPB, we have absolutely no maize. So you wonder where,
Isaac.
No, he said there is maize. We just said
Isaac
maize
Ruto
in Kiswahili. We said maize eco because the deputy president said we have enough maize to take us through the famine. The reality is we are staring a failed regime in the face.
No.
Let me say something. Let me say something.
A crisis in the health sector. There is no food for Kenyans.
You know.
And many Kenyans are telling you, Trevor, that the reality of the matter is that this Unga is not there. Somebody has even just sent me a picture of how Unga is looking like at Uchumi Supermarket. They've even just milled it and put it in a paper bag and put it on the shelves.
How can you authenticate that photo?
I think I've seen that photo, and by all fairness, you can't even tell it's from Uchumi. And I think,
or even
whether it's Unga,
or it's in someone's house
from there, or it looks like a sack of flour. But more importantly, I think it's quite unfortunate that we politicize and we pick the issues that touch on Kenyans and spin them. And I say that because it's not just, we have not seen the spread of panic with Unga only, because they're using it because it's an election year. They want to build on it and use it as a campaign tool. The panic buying is for real, and it is happening because the media, what we are reporting here and what you're replaying is that there is no Unga. So guys are panicking and are going to buy in bulk so that tomorrow there is no Unga. But in terms of availability and in terms of the government being responsive, has it been? I say yes, because she's asking, why are we here? We are here because the rains failed. That is the first thing. The rains failed. What we are doing is mitigation, as a government should do, to react to what has happened in terms of the rains and the patterns.
Okay.
But I think this issue of misleading Kenyans. And I say that not just on Unga. If you remember when we started issuing title deeds as Jubilee government to the coast region in Kwale. In fact, Raila told some to not pick them. They are fake. Can you imagine? And people will start thinking, oh, they are fake. They are not real because they have been told they are not real by Raila. The same thing is happening now. And I think it is not patriotism, it is not being a nationalist.
Speaking of politics, let me play something the NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga said on the cost of living, and also Jubilee responded on that. Listen to this.
Tumesema ndani ya siku 90 gharama ya maisha itarudi chini. Hiyo bei ya unga itarudi chini. Sio hii ya hawa jamaa ambayo wanafanya tu kwa sababu ya kampeni. Bei ya sukari itarudi chini. Bei ya maziwa itarudi chini. Kodi ya nyumba itarudi chini.
Sio tu amkia asubuhi useme ya kwamba ati kutoka kesho kodi itashuka. Itashuka namna gani na hujajenga nyumba za kutosha? Si ndio kodi ishuke, yastahili kwanza tujenge manyumba. Si ni kweli? Na ndio Wakenya wale wanaishi kwa njia ambayo inatakikana.
10 days into the official campaign period, are we seeing any concrete solutions for Kenyans, or is it just back and forth and blame games?
I think we're seeing concrete solutions from Jubilee. The solutions we're giving are not just knee-jerk reactions and just populist statements, as you're hearing. When you say that in 90 days of you being president, that you'll lower rent, and you don't own the houses. That in 90 days you'll have reduced prices of everything. Of course, that we've been able to do in fewer days than those, but without giving a plan. When we say that, for instance, that we're going to have free secondary education from 2018 January, there's thought that's been put behind that. You have to plan. You have to increase the infrastructure in our schools. You need extra classrooms. You need to make sure you've hired a certain number of extra teachers to go into secondary schools and all that. How you say you're going to do it in September, just shows that either there's a very lazy think tank in NASA, or people, you just want to play with Kenyans' minds. Because there's no way you can say that you'll come into government in August, and in September, you'll have the capacity, even just the physical capacity, you'll have the human resource, you'll have the financing to make sure that there's free secondary education. So of course, we have been saying that in the past 4 years as Jubilee, this is what we've been able to do, and you can see it. Okay. From maternity to healthcare to infrastructure to the SGR, which we've seen, despite the challenges that we've gone through as a country, despite, and you remember when we started how it has been, terrorist attacks, there were issues, even our airport burnt down, the ICC cases, etc. And despite all that we're saying, we've been able to set up the infrastructure and the foundation for takeoff of this country, so that, as we're saying now, mbele iko sawa as we move forward towards the future. But code, on the other hand, are not promising anything concrete that is thought out, and anyone, even any policy analyst, even if I stay across the road from the University of Nairobi, will tell you that it's impossible
this campaign promise is feasible.
I think it's,
how do you free the secondary education in September?
As far as Sakaja is concerned, this is impossible, because this is a regime of failed promises.
No.
This regime said within 100 days, our children who are in class 1 would begin getting laptops. To date, this is still in pilot phase. They highlight schools here, a few schools here and there, that they have given these tablets, and the laptops have not come. In fact, children have been repeating class waiting for laptops.
But we talked
about stadia. We talked about 5 stadia. Yeah. Not a single one, to be honest. What we have seen is a government that has been riddled in corruption from the beginning. All manner of scandals are coming in. So I think when Sakaja says that the promises that we are making are not feasible, when you say that we are going to have free secondary education from September, we mean it.
How? Okay.
And this is just a tip of the iceberg.
When will
NASA is going to be, there are already classrooms and students are already learning. All you need to do is to subsidize this from government, because you can have a supplementary budget that then subsidizes funding. We already have students in secondary schools. This idea that you have to build classrooms for you to have free secondary education. You have students They're already learning. All you need to do is to put in government funding so that they do not have to pay the tuition.
She's
Hang on.
reinforcing the point.
Let her finish, then we bring it
I'm
on.
coming.
Let me get back to
But
her.
we're running out
She's
of time.
reinforcing the point.
I'm
And
coming back to the point.
Plus, plus your
Our
closing comment
manifesto
as well.
is based
Oh my
on
God.
Article 43 of the Constitution,
Okay.
which is to provide healthcare, universal healthcare, to provide education, to
lower
provide,
rent.
of course, to provide affordable housing,
Okay.
and lower it. And you know that Jubilee introduced taxes on rent. You know that now landlords have to actually pay taxes. If you were to get that out, you can actually be able to, from a policy perspective, lower rent.
Okay.
And let me tell you,
Let them
No,
respond,
no,
because we're running out of
Just
time.
before Martha, let me just get back to that one point.
Let Martha Wangari respond on this. And also give your closing remarks, because we're running out of time. Sakaja, hold on one second. Let Martha Wangari respond on this. And also, answer Jerry Owili's question. He says, please ask Sakaja Johnson if he's convinced the government he supports did enough in health, education, and devolution sectors. As you close as well.
I think, Trevor, by all fairness, first of all, I don't know whether this NASA government will start with a supplementary budget or will start by a referendum to create positions for these men, the 5 men who need positions. But that aside,
we'll be launching our manifesto on the 19th.
Let's focus on these issues.
But
right
that
now.
aside,
The cost of
but that
living.
aside,
Yes.
I think, you know, the difference between Jubilee and NASA and CODE, whatever they call them, the NASA or CODE, is that one, the government is continuing to deliver. First of all, our campaign is very easy because we are telling people what have we achieved. Of course, we have not done 100%, but I think competitive we have done very well, above average. Because if you go, I was in Kisii recently, and I know the president has been there. If you go to Gucha Hospital and it has equipment worth 400 billion, worth 400 million.
Okay.
If you talk of 187 free maternity money that has touched directly to that Mwananchi.
Okay.
You know, for you it may not make sense,
All
but
right.
to the Mwananchi, those
we're
issues
running out of
matter.
time.
When
Yeah,
you go
okay.
to Ikonge and there's a road being,
Okay, Sakaja, very
being done
briefly,
from
30
Tebilat.
seconds. 30
I mean,
seconds.
She has
30
reinforced my
seconds.
point that I have not thought about this issue of education. It's not about just paying for the kids who are there. The reason why we're doing this is because we need 100% transition rate from class 1 to form 4. More than 1.6 million kids do class 8. How many of them go to form 1? Even just a sheer number, more than half of them are not able to go to form 1 because of the lack of facility. And that's why since time immemorial,
and then you develop
since
it
time
as you go
immemorial, we've been
forward.
telling
so
children
you
that
say
you
something
cannot
so
go
that you
forward.
get it
Let him
so
finish.
it
They really have to
No,
wrap
no,
this
no.
up.
You
It is
say
not
something
proud.
which will
First
send
deal
by
with what
others.
is there,
All right.
and then you
I think you progress.
Okay.